Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. As the group of three got closer to the ancestral mountain, the pressure weighing down on them increased. It was the type of pressure that would have a significant effect on any Foundation establishment cultivator. Only core formation experts would be able to ignore it. Obviously, the summit of the mountain was where the pressure was strongest, and based on Bai Xiaochun's calculations, it would only be possible for someone in late core formation to get that far. However, in consideration of how he was weaker, the fifth young lady took the lead, using the power of her own cultivation base to reduce the pressure on Bai Xiaochun. Moved, Bai Xiaochun followed along, simultaneously engaging in some casual conversation with both her and Bai Lei. Before long, they were at the foot of the mountain. There were numerous paths that led up, and they picked one. As they began to climb, the pressure intensified. Occasionally, they would pass other Foundation establishment clan members, all of whom were sweating profusely and being very careful to avoid the dangerous restrictive spells. With the fifth young lady's help, Bai Xiaochun was able to move much faster than any of the other Foundation establishment cultivators. Of course, even without her help, the pressure wouldn't have fazed him. Not even the pressure at the summit would have been a huge deal, let alone the pressure further down. Because of how kind the fifth young lady was being, Bai Xiaochun tried his best to pretend that he was having difficulty with the pressure, even going so far as to gasp and wheeze occasionally. After all, people outside of the ancestral land were watching, and therefore, Bai Xiaochun had no choice but to proceed with his act. Occasionally, though, he would look over at Bai Qi and his group speeding toward the summit. Eyes sparkling, Bai Xiaochun tried to calculate how long it would take for him to reach the top. When Bai Lei noticed who he was looking at, his eyes flickered, and he lowered his voice and said, "Junior brother Hao, you listen to me. That Bai Qi is someone you can't afford to provoke." Bai Xiaochun looked over at him. Plastering a look of anger onto his face, he said, "Well, it's not like he's actually going to kill me, right?" Bai Lei sighed. "Don't you get it, junior brother Hao? The clan arranged for Bai Qi to get this diva soul, and that shows how much the patriarch favors him. If you keep pulling stunts like you did yesterday, I'm afraid, you will get yourself killed." Bai Lei had a serious expression on his face, but inwardly, he was chuckling. Although Bai Hao had uttered some sharp words the day before, as far as Bai Lei was concerned, he was still just a child. "You listen to me, all right?" he continued. "From now on, stick close to the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice. With him on your side, Bai Qi won't make a move against you, at least not casually." Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times, and then gritted his teeth defiantly. Off to the side, the fifth young lady listened, a slight frown on her face. Although Bai Lei's words seemed to be uttered out of concern, to her, it seemed more like he was trying to take advantage of the conflict between Bai Hao and Bai Qi for his own benefit. However, now was not the time to point that out. Sighing, she pondered how everyone in the Bai clan seemed to have their own agenda, and how everyone was always fighting and bickering. It was really exhausting to live in an environment like that, which was one of the reasons she didn't feel very at home in this place. Sighing, she looked over at Bai Hao with compassion and sadness. It was bad enough that he had such a lowly standing in the clan, but now, just when he had finally managed to prove himself to some extent, someone came along to try to manipulate him. Seeing that Bai Lei was about to continue speaking, she jumped in and said, "Hey, look at that halo over there, Bai Hao. See the bracelet inside. It's a magical item that's well suited to you." Bai Xiaochun looked over at a nearby boulder, upon which was a green bracelet. The fluctuations rolling off of it weren't very strong, but would clearly be useful to someone in early Foundation establishment. In the same moment that he looked over at it, the fifth young lady performed an incantation gesture and waved her finger, causing a beam of green light to fly out. As the beam neared the boulder, a protective shield of light suddenly sprang into being. The green beam of light pierced through the shield, wrapped around the bracelet, and then dragged it back into the fifth young lady's hand. After looking it over, she handed it to Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun took the bracelet, looked up at the fifth young lady with her kind gaze, then clasped hands and bowed. "Thank you, fifth young lady. Take it. You need every bit of protection you can get. In our clan, you can't trust anybody." Looking melancholy, she shook her head and then continued along the path. Bai Lei frowned, not very pleased that the fifth young lady had interrupted him. However, considering her high status, he knew that she would eventually be married off to someone important outside the clan. Likely, she would achieve an even higher standing in the future, and therefore, he pretended that nothing had happened, and just continued to chat randomly. The fifth young lady obviously wasn't in a very good mood, and only occasionally responded to Bai Lei's banter. However, whenever they encountered items useful for Foundation establishment cultivators, she would take them and give them to Bai Xiaochun. 2 hours later, Bai Xiaochun had acquired about 8 magical items, a few thousand souls, and even some soul medicine. He was quite moved by all of this. The fifth young lady was now the second person in the Bai clan to have taken a liking to him. Most importantly, she wasn't trying to get anything out of him. She was simply treating him like family, out of compassion. Another thing he noticed was that there were items available on the mountain that the fifth young lady actually wished to acquire, but could not because of the level of her cultivation base. Bai Lei took the initiative to get a few things that he wanted, then apparently felt a bit embarrassed and got a few things to hand over to Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun accepted everything silently, and the group proceeded along for about an hour. By this point, they were about halfway up the mountain, which was when Bai Qi actually reached the summit. His journey up the mountain had gone very smoothly, with almost nothing causing any problems for him or getting in his way. The diva soul was put here for me, he told himself. It's mine. The reason why Bai Qi had such an easy time going up the mountain was because he knew exactly how to deal with all of the restrictive spells on the way up. His father had provided him with that information, and therefore, Bai Qi didn't need to waste almost any of his cultivation base power to get to the summit. From his current position, he could see the altar and the earth-type diva soul on top of it. Eyes shining with anticipation, he shifted his gaze from the soul to the restrictive spell protecting it. Now that he was here, all he had to do was walk over and take what was his. This is the last restrictive spell, and also the most powerful. Only someone with the strongest and purest blood can get through. Thankfully, I came prepared. Once I get that diva soul, then I can go and kill Bai Hao. Chuckling coldly, Bai Qi sliced a cut open on his index finger and then spattered some blood onto the restrictive spell. At the same time, he patted his bag of holding, producing a jade bottle that he crushed, causing a drop of blood to appear. That blood came from the diva patriarch and was incredibly pure. When Bai Qi reached the summit and began to deal with the restrictive spell, many of the other clan members on the mountain looked up with complex emotions. Although most of them were frustrated and jealous, there was nothing they could do. Outside of the ancestral land, the clan members who had gathered to watch the event saw what was happening, and various serious expressions could be seen on their faces. The clan chief smiled broadly, whereas the clan elders looked on indifferently. After all, they had all agreed to this matter, and knew that the supposed trial by fire was mostly just for show. Originally, Madame Kai should have been in custody and being punished, but for some reason she was now in the crowd, excitedly watching the scene play out. The person paying the closest attention to Bai Qi, though, was Bai Xiaochun. Now that he saw Bai Qi dealing with the restrictive spell, he stopped in place to think for a moment. Then he turned to look at the fifth young lady and suddenly, seemed to be bursting with energy. His eyes shone far more brightly than before, and for some reason, he seemed taller and stronger. It was as if, moments ago, he had been a tiny hill, but was now a towering mountain peak. Conversely, the ancestral mountain he was standing on was now like a tiny hill compared to him. The air around him even began to distort as something like a black hole formed. "Thank you for watching out for me, fifth young lady," he said. "I'd like to pay you back for your kindness. If you agree, then tell me what things you want from the mountain, and I'll get them for you. Take your pick." The sudden change to Bai Xiaochun happened so quickly that neither the fifth young lady nor Bai Lei were able to react. Bai Lei's eyes widened, and his heart began to pound. For some reason, Bai Xiaochun seemed like one of the clan's grand elders right now, completely shocking. In fact, when their eyes met, Bai Lei felt his mind spinning. The fifth young lady was panting, completely taken aback by what Bai Xiaochun had just said. Bai Xiaochun looked at her and once again said, "Well, fifth young lady, take your pick." All of a sudden, the fifth young lady seemed to realize what was going on. Shivering, and eyes shining, she suddenly laughed. "If you can get anything on this mountain for me, then what are you waiting for? Take it all." Bai Xiaochun looked at her deeply, then threw his head back and laughed. "You got it." Very few people on the mountain had even noticed the change in Bai Xiaochun. Most everyone else was transfixed by Bai Qi as he dealt with the final restrictive spell at the summit, and were looking on with jealousy, frustration, and countless other emotions. This is really unfair. That's right. Even if Bai Qi were more of a chosen than he already is, he shouldn't have been able to make it to the top of the mountain that easily. I don't care if he is in the great circle of core formation. HMPH. I was watching him, and from what I could tell, he knew how to deal with those restrictive spells before he even got to them. It was too easy for him. Come on, don't you realize what's going on? Not even Bai Lei put up a fight. It's obvious that the ancestral land was opened just for Bai Qi. The leadership already decided to give him the Diva Soul, that way he can get his 5 elements Diva Beast Souls and form his nascent soul. Most angry of all were the people from the auxiliary bloodlines, whereas the people from the direct bloodline seemed very pleased. They even went so far as to rebuke anyone they heard saying anything they didn't like. Bai Qi is the Qilin son of our clan. It's the will of heaven and earth that he gets that Diva Soul. All sorts of talk could be heard on the mountain. Meanwhile, people on the outside were also dealing with all sorts of thoughts and feelings. No one outside had noticed Bai Xiaochun yet either. Bai Qi was currently the main focus in the ancestral land, and was like a blazing sun that drew all attention. As he went about dismantling the restrictive spell, discussions could also be heard near the stone gate. So, the Diva Soul is going to Bai Qi. I'd guessed that it would be him. Not that we would have had a say in it anyway, it was definitely set up ahead of time. Nobody else even had a chance. But then again, nobody is on the same level as Bai Qi. As people discussed the matter, the faces of the clan elders were all expressionless. After all, they had all known ahead of time that this would happen. Even the grand elders from the Hall of Justice and the Hall of Corrections weren't reacting. None of them qualified to argue with the decisions made by the patriarch, and furthermore, Bai Qi really was the cream of the crop of the current generation. Most excited of all was Madame Kai. She was physically shaking from excitement, and could barely breathe straight as she watched the image of Bai Qi on the screen. My Kier is definitely the Qilin son of the Bai clan, she thought. That Diva Soul was prepared just for him. How dare that little son of a bitch Bai Hao try to compete with my Kier? What gives him the right? Everything was prepared for Kier. All we did was take his research notes and arrange for him to be killed. How dare he fight back against us? You just wait, Bai Hao. As soon as my Kier gets that Diva Soul, you'll definitely be dead, you son of a bitch. Madame Kai laughed out loud, sounding completely elated. The clan chief no longer looked grim like he usually did. As the sun shone down onto his smiling face, he seemed warm, happy, and proud. However, even as Bai Qi attempted to break through the restrictive spell, people outside of the ancestral land finally noticed that Bai Xiaochun was thrumming with a shocking energy. In fact, that energy was so shocking, so indescribably powerful, that it caused the screen to distort. The fact that the energy seemed to be interfering with heaven and earth caused looks of shock to appear on the faces of many of the clan members. That's Bai Hao. What's going on? What's happening with Bai Hao? Eyes widened as more people looked over. The clan elders seemed shocked, as did Madame Kai and the clan chief. All of them subconsciously looked over at Bai Xiaochun. It was in that very moment that Bai Xiaochun threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Then, he looked at the 5th young lady and said, "All right, 5th young lady. If you have the guts to ask for everything, then I have the guts to get it for you." Only moments ago, Bai Xiaochun had come to realize that although the 5th young lady seemed soft, she was actually a lot more tough and tenacious than he'd realized. If he took all the treasures on the mountain and gave them to her, it wouldn't be easy for her to keep them. However, she obviously knew that, and yet was still confident enough to say what she had. In that case, Bai Xiaochun wasn't going to disagree with her. As he laughed, his hair whipped about in the air, and his cultivation base began to rise rapidly. In almost the blink of an eye, he went from early foundation establishment to the mid-stage, the late stage, and then the Great Circle. Within a few earth-shaking moments, he had become a core formation cultivator. Wind screamed around him, shaking the entire ancestral mountain, rising up into the sky and even provoking lightning. All of the clan members on the mountain were completely shaken, and began to cry out in shock. This, heavens, what's happening? They weren't the only ones to react in such a way. Even more shocked was Bai Lei, who felt like his mind was being struck by lightning. His face turned completely ashen, and he staggered backward, trembling the entire time. Because he was closer to what was happening, he felt like Bai Hao had become a raging ocean, while he was a little rowboat being tossed about by the waves. It was almost impossible for him to comprehend what was going on, and he felt like he might get wiped out of existence at any moment. I can't believe he's so strong. Bai Lei's mind was devolving into a blank, and he was already sweating profusely. As for the 5th young lady, she was panting. She had already come to the realization that Bai Hao had been hiding the true level of his cultivation base, and to see him explode to higher levels of power right in front of her caused her eyes to shine brightly. It took only the briefest of moments for Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base to reach the shocking level of the Great Circle of Core Formation. And then, it went a bit further, into the pseudo-nascent soul stage. With his current cultivation base, Bai Xiaochun looked like an immortal devil, his eyes shining like the stars, his fleshly body power surging. Although he was slender and had a fair face, he seemed like he contained the explosive power of a divine dragon. Then, even as he continued to laugh, he lifted his right foot. The moment had come to vent all of the negative feelings that had cropped up in his heart because of Bai Hao's tragic fate. All of his discontent with the Bai clan was about to erupt. Without any hesitation, he stomped his foot down onto the surface of the ancestral mountain. Instantly, a sound like heavenly thunder filled the air. The entire mountain began to shake, provoking cries of alarm from all of the clan members standing on it. Bai Xiaochun stomped down with the full power of his own cultivation base, as well as his 3 clones. It was a force that surpassed the core formation stage and also contained control power, which seemed capable of rocking the entire mountain. And that was not to mention his fleshly body power, which was in the great circle of the 3rd level of the Undying Live Forever technique. He was already at the point of making contact with the 3rd shackle, giving him access to monstrous force. All of the frustration he had been keeping suppressed in the Bai clan was unleashed in the stomp of his foot, which shook the ancestral mountain so violently that a crevice opened up on it. Cracking sounds could be heard as, in the blink of an eye, the crevice spread out through the entire mountain. Many areas of the mountain even began to completely collapse. To the clan members on the mountain itself, it was like an apocalypse of destruction. Screams and shouts could be heard everywhere, and at the same time, the halos formed by countless restrictive spells were simultaneously destroyed. Moments later, all of the items of good fortune which had been placed into the ancestral land by the Bai clan were out in the open. Vast amounts of magical items, soul bodies, and soul medicine all appeared, completely unprotected by any restrictive spells. Everyone was completely shaken by what they were seeing. The glitter of countless magical items, numerous soul medicines and endless soul bodies was enough to obfuscate the sky. All of the cultivators on the mountain were having a hard time staying on their feet, but as soon as they saw the vast number of items flying up, their eyes began to burn with passion, and they began to shout out loud. That's a mid-grade soul medicine, the Magasword of Annihilation. Heavens! That's one of the most powerful magical treasures in our clan. That's a metal-type diva beast soul. Bai Lei looked on in stupefaction as Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, causing whooshing sounds to fill the air as all of the items which had just flown up began to speed toward him. That included almost everything that had been placed onto the mountain, and yet, Bai Xiaochun completely ignored them, and simply sent them to the 5th young lady. Hurry up and take them, 5th young lady. The 5th young lady was completely taken aback. Despite having been prepared for something like this, to see it actually unfolding in front of her left her almost shell-shocked. That was especially true considering that the single stomp of Bai Xiaochun's foot had destroyed all of the restrictive spells on the ancestral mountain, as well as all of the glowing halos. She had never even heard of anyone who could do such a thing, not even the venerable clan elders. It was even as she stared blankly that Bai Xiaochun's words entered her ears and shocked her into clarity. Eyes shining with brilliant light, she quickly assessed the items, then gritted her teeth and opened her bag of holding. Even if Bai Hao plans to betray the clan, she thought, I'm claiming these things, and nobody will take them away from me. Although the 5th young lady seemed weak, she was actually very tenacious, and thus, it was without the slightest hesitation that she drew upon the power of her cultivation base to drag everything into her bag of holding. Bai Xiaochun used his control power to help. Magical items, soul medicines and soul bodies alike all flew toward the 5th young lady and disappeared into her bag of holding. Everyone on the mountain could see what was happening, resulting in gasps and cries of alarm. However, most astonished of all was Bai Lei. The entire situation had changed so quickly that he couldn't even react. Instead of Bai Hao being the foolish brat he had taken him to be, he was now a dazzling, almighty being worthy of ultimate veneration. Even more mind-shaking was how all of the treasures on the ancestral mountain were now being taken by the 5th young lady. Because of the incredible pressure Bai Lei felt from Bai Xiaochun, he didn't dare to say a single thing, or even reveal by his facial expression that he wasn't pleased. His intuition was telling him that something big was happening in the Bai clan. His intuition was correct, and in fact, almost everyone in the ancestral land was thinking the same thing. As for the people outside, watching the screen on the stone gate, many of them were also being pricked by intuition. The gathered crowd watched as Bai Hao suddenly powered up, shattered the ancestral mountain, and then took all of its treasures. The result was that they felt like their minds were being struck by countless bolts of lightning. This, heavens. What's going on? Is that Bai Hao? Impossible. I thought he was in early Foundation establishment. But that's clearly not early foundation establishment, that's more like the nascent soul stage. What exactly is going on here? Bai Hao has terrifying self-control. He actually has a nascent soul cultivation base, but kept it a secret this entire time. Impossible. Something big is going down. As of this moment, Bai Hao is invincible within the ancestral land. Heavens, the diva soul. His goal is the diva soul. Bai Qi is in danger. As everyone began to cry out, the clan elders shot to their feet, their expressions flickering dramatically. All minds and hearts were completely shaken. No one among the audience could actually see Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base, so everyone just assumed he had a nascent soul. However, the clan elders were all nascent soul experts, and could see exactly what the situation was. Bai Hao is actually in the pseudo-nascent soul stage. Damn it, what if he's not the real Bai Hao, but an imposter? That's not likely. Without the blood of the Bai clan in him, he wouldn't be able to get past the clan spell formation, not even with a nascent soul cultivation base. With a cultivation base like that, if he really is Bai Hao, then he is the Qilin son of the Bai clan. These clan elders were stern and awe-inspiring people, but at the moment, their eyes were lit with shock. The Grand Elders from the Hall of Corrections and the Hall of Justice had similar reactions, especially the latter, whose eyes were shining with utter incredulity. Pseudo-nascent soul stage. This Bai Hao obviously came across some destiny-changing good fortune, and yet managed to keep it a secret. His level of self-control surpasses his own cultivation base. Not only does he have shocking skill in spirit enhancement, but he also has an incredible cultivation base. Latent talent like this is the type that will only be seen in the clan once in 1,000 years. Now that is what the Qilin son of the Bai clan should be like. The two Grand Elders felt their minds reeling. Bai Xiaochun's sudden rise to prominence was something completely unexpected, an event which no one could ever have predicted would happen. They weren't the only ones to be floundering in shock. The representatives from the two other great clans and the emissary from Giant Ghost City were so shocked their eyes were bulging out of their faces. Never could any of that group have imagined that they would witness something so unbelievable during their trip to the Bai clan. Latent talent like that has never appeared in the Bai clan before. Furthermore, it's obvious that this Bai Hao has a beef with his own clan. Well, this development is a good thing. If Bai Hao were on the side of his people, that could lead to a new rise of the Bai clan. Bai Hao, interesting. I need to report this back to His Highness the King. It looks like a schism might occur within the Bai clan. The two representatives and the emissary were even more shocked than the clan elders, and yet, there was still a person whose shock surpassed everyone else's. Madame Kai was literally shaking, and began to scream, Bai Hao, you little son of a bitch, you deserve to die. Damn you, you deserve to die. Men, get in there and kill him. Kill him, kill him. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, and she seemed to be on the verge of going insane. Her hair was completely disheveled, and based on her unhinged and ear-piercing screams, she seemed like she couldn't handle the situation. There was really no other way for her to react. Her heart was filled with unprecedented terror and astonishment at the realization that Bai Qi's previous explanation about Bai Hao getting outside help to kill his assassin was completely incorrect. Obviously, Bai Hao had done the deed himself. When she realized how powerful Bai Hao's cultivation base was, and that he had already dispatched previous assassins, as well as the fact that Bai Qi had essentially publicly stated that he wanted to kill him, it meant that there was little question about what was to come in the ancestral land. Madame Kai's vision began to grow dim, and she couldn't help but scream in terror. Bai Qi was in great danger. No, this can't be happening. It can't be. Kier, get out of there. Unfortunately, Madame Kai had already forgotten that her voice couldn't enter the ancestral land, no matter how loudly she screamed. Ignoring all decorum, she rushed toward her husband and grabbed his arm madly. Kier is the Qilin son of the Bai clan. He can't die. Of course, the clan chief didn't need any urging from Madame Kai to understand the gravity of the situation. Almost as soon as Madame Kai grabbed his arm, he threw his head back and howled with grief and rage that could pierce the heavens. Damn you, Bai Hao. As of this moment, the clan chief was reacting exactly the same as he had the previous day. Instead of being glad that his own son Bai Hao was rising to prominence, he was descending into the depths of fury. Why do you have latent talent like this? Why do you have a cultivation base like this? Your fate is to submit. You are the lowest of the low, a bastard son. Why do you have to fight back? Just like Madame Kai, the clan chief was desperately worried about Bai Qi, so much so that he took a step forward and waved his finger at the stone gate. Rumbling sounds could be heard, and the gate trembled. Shockingly, the clan chief was going all out to try to open the entrance to the ancestral land. Once he did, he would pass through that entrance, find Bai Xiaochun, and kill him. After the ancestral land was closed, opening it from the outside required time. However, the clan chief was desperate, so much so that his eyes were completely bloodshot. "Clan elders," he said loudly, "lend me a helping hand. That unfilial bastard must die." A few of the clan elders from the direct bloodline flew forward to help forcibly open the stone gate. However, the other elders hesitated, especially the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice. Enraged, Madame Kai shrieked, "If you dare to stand idly by, and my Kier gets hurt in any way, then I won't let any of you off the hook." In her desperation, Madame Kai even turned to the representative from the Kai clan to ask for help. Although the man hesitated at first, they were related, so after a moment passed, he came forward to help. However, despite all that, the entrance wouldn't budge. Even with the help of a diva patriarch, the gate wouldn't open quickly. At best, it might open after enough time passed for an incense stick to burn. Rumbling sounds filled the clan, which was rapidly devolving into chaos. Inside the ancestral land, the mountain was shattered, and the restrictive spells were destroyed. As for Bai Qi, he had only been about halfway finished with his work on the restrictive spell. Now his face was a mask of shock as he staggered to the side. Looking over his shoulder, he saw what looked like a massive tempest, within which shone the eyes of Bai Xiaochun. The sight of those eyes struck Bai Qi to the core. Something like divine sense pierced into him with lightning-like speed, provoking a scream from him as intense fear and disbelief filled his heart. What was most alarming of all was how Bai Qi suddenly felt like a bug, as if those eyes could determine his life or death with a single thought. Impossible. This can't be happening. Bai Qi had never felt more terrified for his own life. He was shaking, every inch of his flesh, blood, and bones screaming out in terror. He immediately abandoned the restrictive spell he had been unraveling, and began to flee. "If I hold out for long enough," he thought, "Father will definitely come save me." However, almost as soon as he turned to make his escape, Bai Xiaochun chuckled within the tempest. "Why aren't you taking down that restrictive spell? Allow me to help you out." All members of the Bai clan looked on with pounding hearts as Bai Xiaochun took a step forward. Originally, he had been fully 9,000 meters away from Bai Qi. However, that distance was nothing to cause much pause for Bai Xiaochun. He was like a heavenly god, with a single step propelling him 900 meters ahead, leaving behind an afterimage that made it seem almost like there were two Bai Xiaochuns standing in the ancestral land. Furthermore, his killing intent was so powerful that the entire ancestral land began to shake, both the violet sky and the black soil alike. "He's going to kill Bai Qi." The clan members inside of the ancestral land were all dumbstruck. Bai Lei was shaking, gulping in fear, his face completely ashen. As for the fifth young lady, she looked on silently, but with brightly shining eyes. Outside of the ancestral land, Bai Xiaochun's shocking killing intent, and Bai Qi's abject fear, caused everyone to begin to shout in alarm. "Bai Qi is in danger. Heavens! Is Bai Hao actually going to go so far as to kill him?" It wasn't just the ordinary clan members who were shocked. The clan elders had very serious expressions on their faces. The fact that Bai Xiaochun had taken all of the magical items and other good fortune in the ancestral land didn't matter too much according to the clan rules. But if he actually killed other clan members right out in the open, that would be a different matter. Any objective observer would be able to tell how unfair the situation was. After all, if the roles were reversed, and Bai Qi was going after Bai Hao to kill him, the clan elders would likely frown, but wouldn't take the situation as seriously. But now, things were different. Bai Qi had been selected by the patriarch to prevail in the ancestral land. Bai Hao's sudden rise to prominence was completely unexpected, and there was no way that they could instantly discount Bai Qi's importance. Not even the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice could sit idly by at this point. He also stepped forward to help open the stone gate. However, all of the other clan elders were thinking of things in a different way than those from the direct bloodline. Bai Hao obviously had incredible latent talent, and the fact that he had kept it hidden all this time proved that he was a true chosen of the clan. As such, they couldn't simply watch as he did something unforgivable. "Bai Hao, don't do something that you'll regret," thought the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice. "Just wait until you get out of there, and I'll handle everything for you." He knew that if Bai Hao killed Bai Qi, especially in a situation like this, then he would damage his relationship with the clan permanently. Killing Bai Qi would essentially be a public act of rebellion against the clan. As the clan elders burst into action, the emissary from Giant Ghost City looked at the image of Bai Xiaochun on the screen with shining eyes. The sight of Bai Xiaochun stepping toward Bai Qi caused the clan chief to go even more crazy. Throwing his head back, he roared, "How dare you, you unfilial bastard!" Then he attacked the gate with renewed vigor. "Stay your hand, you son of a bitch!" Madame Kai screamed shrilly, trembling with madness, her hair flying about in complete disarray. It was almost as if, despite being outside of the ancestral land, she could sense the intense level of Bai Xiaochun's killing intent. After taking his 900-meter step, Bai Xiaochun looked over his shoulder at a spot high up in the sky, where the faint outline of a stone door was visible. It was almost as if he could sense the maddened glares of the clan chief, Madame Kai, and the other members of the direct bloodline. Finally getting anxious, huh? He said with a cold chuckle. Based on the vortex that was forming up above, he didn't need to analyze the situation at all to realize that they were trying to open the ancestral land from the outside. I wonder if that diva patriarch will do something, he thought, his eyes flickering. But now wasn't the time to ponder the situation. Looking back at Bai Qi, his killing intent soared, and he took a second step. By this point, the entire world was shaking as violently as if a giant had stamped his foot down. The air rippled and distorted as everything slowed down from Bai Xiaochun's perspective. His second step propelled him even farther than the first step, a total of 2,100 meters. Everything around him was shaking violently as he moved with blinding speed. By this point, he was only about 6,000 meters away from Bai Qi, who suddenly shrieked, "The clan elders can all see you, Bai Hao. How dare you think about killing me?" Bai Qi was so scared he couldn't even think straight. Although Bai Xiaochun's second step had been taken casually, the speed on display was so terrifying that Bai Qi obviously couldn't escape. The sensation of deadly crisis he felt was like a flash flood that caused even his soul to shake. Outside of the ancestral land, the souls of the clan chief and Madame Kai were shaking just as hard, and it was with complete despair that they watched Bai Xiaochun speeding toward Bai Qi. Regardless of what they did, the ancestral land needed time to open, and clearly, they didn't have enough of it to get inside and rescue Bai Qi. Eyes completely bloodshot, Madame Kai screamed, "You'll die in pain, Bai Hao." The clan chief's chest ached with fear, and his expression was unsurpassably grim. The prospect of seeing his own son killed in front of him had him descending into madness. And of course, he couldn't forget the fact that Bai Hao was also his own flesh and blood. All the other members of the clan were panting in shock as they looked at the screen on the stone gate, and the image of Bai Hao descending upon Bai Qi like some sort of immortal devil. Flicking his sleeve, Bai Xiaochun took a third step, a step which propelled him with lightning-like speed that vastly surpassed his previous movements. It was almost a teleportation, a movement which people couldn't even track with their eyes as he moved 6,000 meters in the blink of an eye. He was now directly in front of Bai Qi, his energy surging, a string of sonic booms echoing out behind him. Bai Qi felt like a cotton ball facing a hurricane. He was incapable of doing anything, and racked with despair. First step, 900 meters. Second step, 2,100 meters. Third step, 6,000 meters. The speed on display here was so unbelievable that the members of the Bai clan who were watching felt like their hearts were being bashed by tidal waves of shock. Most of them couldn't even breathe. Bai Qi stared at Bai Xiaochun, panting, wilting under the pressure he was facing. Scared out of his mind, he shrieked, "I'm your brother, Bai Hao. If you dare to kill me, you'll be a traitor to the clan." When Bai Xiaochun replied to him, it was with a voice as cold as midwinter snow. "Yeah? So what?" Bai Xiaochun's words echoed out, shaking everything in the ancestral land. Up in the sky, an enormous vortex was forming that almost seemed to represent the fury of the heavens. The ancestral mountain was shaking violently, with rocks and debris tumbling down everywhere. As for the clan members who still stood on the mountain, they were so shocked they couldn't even think straight, and were merely watching events play out with their jaws hanging open. This was a case of brothers trying to kill each other. One was the Qilin son of the Bai clan, the other was a bastard son. One had once been a blazing sun, while the other had been a bug. But now, everything had been turned around. The Qilin son was the bug, and the bastard son was the blazing sun. Although Bai Xiaochun wasn't incredibly tall, as he stood in front of Bai Qi, he seemed to blot out the violet sky, and to make the crimson sun up above grow dark. The sight of a single person surpassing the sky and blocking the sun created an image that caused the observing members of the Bai clan to devolve into further shock. Members of the direct bloodline and auxiliary bloodlines alike were so astonished they forgot to breathe, and their minds were struck motionless. Bai Lei's scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode, and the fifth young lady's eyes were blank with astonishment. What Bai Xiaochun was doing right now was something they would never be able to forget for the rest of their lives. No matter how many years passed, they would never be capable of blotting out this memory. Don't push things too far, Bai Hao. The despair in Bai Qi's eyes had reached an indescribable level, and he was seemingly paralyzed. He wanted to fight back, but the pressure weighing down on him from Bai Xiaochun made it impossible. It was like facing a windstorm of such epic power that it left him completely powerless. It didn't matter that he was in the great circle of core formation. It didn't matter that he was the Qilin son of the Bai clan. To stand in front of Bai Xiaochun was like standing in terror at the gates of the underworld. Taking a step back, Bai Qi screamed, "If you kill me, the Bai clan will never rest until they find you. You won't be able to get away from them. No matter how big the wildlands are, you'll never escape." Terror and fear gripped Bai Qi's soul, driving him into madness as he cried, "Don't be rash, Bai Hao. We can talk things over. I'm your big brother." "Who cares?" Bai Xiaochun said, his voice exploding like thunder from the highest heavens. With that, he reached out with his right hand, the mere movement of which caused the violet sky and the red sun to distort as his energy skyrocketed, bursting past his previous level with explosive intensity. RUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUU almost as if the entire ancestral land was being crushed. And the hand to do the crushing was the very hand which Bai Xiaochun had just reached out with. Everyone on the mountain was deafened, and their eyes went blank. No soul and no mind could go unaffected by that hand. They weren't the only ones to be affected. The clan members outside of the stone gate were all astonished, and Madame Kai was screaming her head off. "Stay your hand, Bai Hao." The clan elders were reeling in shock, their auras destabilized by the sight of Bai Hao raising his hand toward the ashen-faced, screaming Bai Qi. Everyone else in the clan was equally shocked. All eyes, all streams of divine sense, were focused on the screen and the image of Bai Xiaochun. Is that really Bai Hao? That palm, Bai Hao, is turning traitor. The clan chief was going mad, raving and raging as he battered the stone gate in its spell formation. Tears of blood leaked out of the corners of his eyes as he was forced to watch helplessly as his son was about to be killed. "I'm going to skin you alive, Bai Hao," he shrieked. As of this moment, he was no longer a clan chief but rather, a father. And yet, despite everything, he couldn't forget that he wasn't just Bai Qi's father, he was Bai Hao's father too. As the Bai clan reeled in shock, something else was happening in a hidden chamber in the catacombs beneath the clan. Within that secret chamber, 7 wrist-thick candles were spread out in a circle and were burning with green flame. In the middle of the circle of candles, a wrinkled old man sat cross-legged in meditation. He was little more than skin and bones, with a virtually hairless head, and looked almost like he had just crawled up out of the grave. Suddenly, the old man's eyes opened, and began to glow with the light of the sun and the moon. It was an oppressive glow that, if anyone could see it, would immediately make them forget about everything except the man's eyes. The old man slowly looked up, and his vision passed through the earth and soil until he could see Bai Qi and Bai Xiaochun on the screen on the stone gate. The old man didn't even bother to look closely at Bai Qi. Instead, his eyes came to focus on Bai Xiaochun. His voice sounded like bones rubbing against bones as he murmured, "With latent talent like that, and that aura, he's much more suitable than Bai Qi to be my next incarnation." Meanwhile, back in the ancestral land, Bai Xiaochun's soaring energy filled all heaven and earth, making him the complete focus of all attention. Although his hand was not physically large, it seemed powerful enough to wipe away everything in existence. It was so strong it could destroy the sun and moon, rip apart the ancestral mountain, and shatter all the lands. As Bai Qi watched that hand rising up, it was as if the violet sky vanished, and the crimson sun disappeared. To Bai Qi, Bai Xiaochun's hand became the will of the heavens, and the only thing that existed in the entire ancestral land. To Bai Qi, that hand became the representation of death itself. His eyes felt like they were going to explode, and his blood didn't even seem capable of pumping through his veins. "Don't tell me you're going to turn traitor against the clan, Bai Hao." He knew that outside, his father and mother were doing everything they could to break inside and save him. He also knew that hundreds of clan members on the mountain were all looking at him. But none of that mattered. He was filled with the terrifying realization that nothing in heaven or earth could possibly save him. Almost as soon as Bai Qi mentioned turning traitor, Bai Xiaochun's voice could be heard, responding with crushing volume that caused the air itself to vibrate. "So what if I turn traitor?" As those words echoed out, Bai Qi's senses converged on one thing. It was as if all light, all energy, and everything else in the ancestral land had vanished, and the entire world consisted of one single palm. And then, the palm descended. "No!" Bai Qi screamed hysterically. He was not willing to die, and definitely not willing to die by Bai Hao's hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair in disarray, and his mind gripped by madness. Without any hesitation, he overdrew his cultivation base, using every scrap of energy he could find, and more, performing a double-handed incantation gesture that caused soul power to thrum within him. Then, he shoved out with both of his hands to fight back against Bai Xiaochun. However, such resistance was like a mantis trying to stop a war chariot. The palm descending onto him was backed by the power of all heaven and earth, and could crush anything in its path as easily as crushing dried weeds. The palm landed on Bai Chi's head, destroying all resistance. Cracking sounds could be heard as his body began to fall apart, completely and utterly incapable of withstanding the blast of that palm. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.